I don't know who's still doing 1950s accounting, he said, pacing like a coke-addled golden retriever, but this company's stepping into the future. His voice bounced off the glass conference room walls like a rubber ball nobody wanted. I was still seated at the end of the table, sipping weak coffee and silently counting how many times he'd used the word disruption in one meeting. 8. 9 if you count the time he said it while adjusting his belt. His name was Travis. 28 years old, straight out of Stanford, and freshly anointed as our new CEO by a board too drunk on youth Kool-Aid to recognize arrogance in a tailored suit. He arrived with a LinkedIn grin and a vision board made of buzzwords, immediately replacing half our executive team with crypto bros and frat house philosophers. His first move? Slashing my operations control department by half, called it a right-sizing. Said algorithms and outsourced ledger bots could handle the stuff I used to spend 10-hour days perfecting. I didn't argue. I just collected my layoff meeting bingo card, leaner, agile, cost-optimized, then went back to my corner of the office and kept doing what I always did, keeping the books clean. I've been the operations controller here for 6 years. Before that, I was reconciling storm-drenched ledgers for a seafood company that barely survived 3 hurricanes and a lawsuit over mislabeled clams. I know what a clean trail looks like. I know what it feels like when it isn't. And lately, it hadn't. It started small, too small for anyone chasing innovation to care. A dozen Uber receipts labeled off-site lunch but billed at 10 p.m. A consulting invoice that hit the books 3 times under 3 different entities, all owned by a guy who just happened to be the CEO's former roommate. Amazon charges for ergonomic chairs when no one in the building had a new chair. Just little oddities, each one explainable if you squint and shrug. But that's the thing about dirt, it doesn't shout, it accumulates. Layer by layer, like soot in a chimney waiting to burn the whole house down. I brought one anomaly to our new head of modern accounting systems, 25-year-old with a degree in data visualization and a TikTok following for explaining taxes using Lego figurines. He patted me on the shoulder and said, "Legacy systems are just scared of change." Legacy system, that's what they called me now. Not controller, not analyst, not even Susan, just legacy system, so I stopped trying. I stopped flagging. I stopped caring. If the new regime wanted a ledger full of funhouse mirrors and disappearing ink, let them have it. I wasn't going to kill myself trying to keep up with a team that thought Google Sheets and intuition could replace a full audit trail. They took away my team, my authority, even my backup login to the budgeting platform. But they didn't take my memory. And they didn't think to check the local archives I'd kept, printed ledgers, signed expense approvals, and my own quiet copy of vendor histories going back 6 fiscal years. I wasn't planning revenge. I'm not the vengeful type. I'm the tired type, the kind of woman who triple-checks the checkers, who budgets her own vacation days by color code and makes her own damn retirement calculator in Excel because the online ones round too generously. I stayed out of the way, updated what little I was still allowed to touch, and watched as the numbers got shinier, looser, slipperier. The quarterly reports turned into marketing documents, not financial disclosures. Suddenly, we were optimizing cost centers and streamlining incentives, which somehow translated to giving the C-suite bonuses based on strategic value instead of, profit. When Travis announced the $220 million merger with a booming AI logistics firm, the office practically burst into applause. Champagne was popped. Balloons appeared in the break room. Someone made cupcakes with little dollar signs on them. Meanwhile, I sat at my desk and stared at the email. "Please direct all pre-merger accounting inquiries to our new integration specialist, Derek, the same guy who once asked me what net of taxes meant in a Slack message. He'd been at the company 5 months. I'd trained him. He once spilled a smoothie into the petty cash drawer and tried to dry the bills with a hairdryer in the bathroom. That Derek was now the integration point between us and the auditors. I wanted to scream. Instead, I updated my own spreadsheets, made sure my exit clause was still in the employee handbook, and silently watched the plane approach the mountain. It was only a matter of time. They rolled out the announcement like it was a damn royal engagement. All-staff meeting, streamed in 4K, with Travis grinning like a game show host on Adderall. "We are entering a transformational partnership," he said, pacing across the slick stage they'd installed in the lobby for this very occasion. "A $220 million merger with Centicore, an AI-forward logistics firm that's changing how the world moves." The crowd clapped like trained seals. I sat in the back, pretending to sip my coffee while calculating in my head what a failed due diligence review would cost in legal fees alone. The Centicore deal wasn't the problem. They were real. They'd done their homework. The problem was us. Or more specifically, the fantasy version of us Travis had been building, on PowerPoint decks, press releases, and performance dashboards rigged tighter than a rigged county fair raffle. "Our books are immaculate," Travis declared, smiling like he'd personally scrubbed them with bleach. "We'll be giving the auditors full transparency, modern dashboards, AI-driven reporting, smart ledger systems. No more outdated practices." That last line was aimed at me. He didn't say it, but he didn't need to. Everyone turned their heads, just a flicker, and then turned back to clap some more. Like they didn't know I'd built those outdated practices from the ground up. Like they forgot who held this place together when the last CFO ghosted us after cooking the books to hide a failed expansion into Canada. By noon, they'd posted a new org chart. I wasn't on it. Instead, merger financial readiness was now a bullet point under Derek's name. The smoothie assassin. His profile photo looked like a fraternity mugshot, button-down shirt too tight, hair gelled like he was starring in a toothpaste commercial. I forwarded it to myself, just in case I needed to show a lawyer one day how deep the negligence ran. Derek came by my desk later, holding a laptop like it was a tray of dynamite. Hey, Susan, just wanted to say no hard feelings. They really want to lean into the tech-forward narrative, you know? Not your fault, you're great at legacy workflows. Legacy workflows. There it was again. I smiled, nodded, and silently wondered if his generation thought books just balanced themselves through positive affirmations. The next few days were a flurry of meetings. Not mine. I wasn't invited to a single one. Derek, on the other hand, kept strutting by in different colored sneakers every day, flanked by interns and ex-juniors who used to ask me where to find the printer toner. They called themselves the Merger Squad. I called them the Four Horsemen of Fiscal Doom. I did get one email from Travis himself. Short, polite, condescending enough to strip paint. Susan, thanks for your years of diligent service. As we enter this exciting new chapter, we'll be streamlining some of our internal processes. I know you'll be supportive of Derek as he transitions into a more visible role. Feel free to support where needed, but let's avoid confusion by keeping clear swim lanes. Swim lanes, that's what we were now, not departments, not people, just chlorinated boundaries. I was a lane, one they wanted to keep out of sight unless the pool caught fire, so I did nothing. I didn't argue, didn't protest. I went to work every day, logged my hours, answered the occasional invoice inquiry, and sat there while the merger team flailed around like toddlers given a Swiss bank account and a crayon. But I watched. I watched the reporting dashboard glitch out on day 2. Watched Derek's data pull return totals that didn't match vendor receipts by a 5-figure margin. Watched a pre-merger reimbursement report list meal expenses from 2 years ago, filed under strategic outreach. Nobody noticed, or if they did, they decided not to care. The narrative was too shiny, the bonuses too close, the press coverage too flattering. Derek posted a selfie with Travis in front of a whiteboard that said $220M, let's effing go. The caption read, crunch time, transparency mode activated. And still, I did nothing, because the math never lies. And the math was already rotting from the inside. I just needed to wait until someone tried to serve it to grown-ups. Showed up on a Tuesday, 4 auditors in business casual armor, armed with clipboards, laptops, and the kind of expressions people wear when they're about to disassemble a plane mid-flight. No announcement, no warning. Just a cold breeze through the accounting floor as their team filed past Derek's corner and set up shop in the big glass conference room everyone called the aquarium. From the moment their laptops opened, the oxygen changed. At first, Derek was all flair and confidence, giving them the guided tour through his shiny dashboards and SmartRecon tools. Said things like we're blockchain adjacent, and we've migrated away from legacy formats like it was gospel. He even used air quotes around paper trails, like receipts were a myth old people believed in, like Santa Claus or pensions. The lead auditor, a quiet, middle-aged woman named Renee, just blinked at him. Didn't even fake a smile. She asked for the raw data exports. Derek hesitated, then offered a slideshow instead. Wrong answer. Within 6 hours, Renee's team had 3 sets of numbers, none of which matched. The main ledger showed one version of January's expense totals. The tax prep files showed another. The backend database they dug up through a buried cloud drive, a system Travis had labeled deprecated and tried to sunset, showed a third. And not just pennies. We're talking 5-digit deltas. Meals overstated by $18,000. Hotel stays with no check-in logs. Plane tickets issued to people who no longer worked here. Some to people who never had. Still, no alarms were sounded. At least, not in public. Travis strolled around that day with his usual manic grin, nodding to employees like everything was fine, like it wasn't slowly unraveling behind glass and spreadsheets. I watched from my desk while he cracked a joke in the hallway, something about audit hiccups being part of the game. Then he disappeared into his office and didn't come out for 3 hours. When he finally did, the grin was gone. The next day, I started getting emails from Derek's interns, carefully worded, passive-aggressive little missives like, "Hey Susan, quick cue, do you remember how our vendor reimbursements were tracked in FY20? Asking for context. Hi, just wondering if you might have copies of any travel logs from Q3 2021? We're missing a few things. Do you recall what code G7 means in the reimbursement tags? Derek thinks it's for group lunches, but the numbers are weird." Yes. Yes, I remembered. Code G7 was the tag I used to assign joint team meals under the $75/person policy cap, before Travis raised the ceiling and removed manager approvals for efficiency. That's when the abuse started. That's when team lunch turned into $400 sushi runs for 2 people. That's when vendor meet and greet became code for a Marriott suite in Miami booked with zero documentation. I didn't answer the emails. I just printed them, quietly, filed them next to the receipts and backup ledgers I'd already saved, color-coded by month, labeled by incident. I wasn't interfering, just documenting, like always. By Thursday, word had spread. The auditors were not happy. People started whispering in the break room. Someone said the lead auditor had asked for all meal receipts over $50 for the last 18 months. Someone else said they spotted Travis arguing with the GC in the parking garage. Derek stopped by my desk again, this time without his laptop shield. "Susan," he said, smiling too wide, "I'd love to loop you into a review of the old ledgers. Just to, cross-reference a few legacy entries." Legacy again, always that word. I leaned back in my chair, met his eyes, and said, "I'm sure you've got it handled. After all, you're the merger readiness lead now." He nodded, but I saw the twitch in his jaw. The same look I'd seen on interns who realized too late they'd deleted the wrong file and were trying to smile their way out of a disaster. Meanwhile, inconsistencies kept piling up like unpaid parking tickets. Travel claims filed with no itineraries. Meal costs that spiked every time Travis flew to New York, always during weekends, always under the pretense of strategic outreach. A limo charge labeled client onboarding billed during a time we had no new clients onboarded. And then there were the shell vendors, entities that billed us just under the quarterly review thresholds. Same style invoices, same typos, different names, all routed through the same P.O. box in Delaware. None of it was conclusive, not yet, but it didn't need to be. I could feel it in my bones. The tension wasn't just in the data, it was in the walls. People were walking quieter. The aquarium's glass walls had been papered over. Auditors were no longer smiling in the break room. Legal had started showing up early. No one said it aloud, but the water was rising. And the only question now was when the first leak would burst. By Monday morning, the glass on the aquarium doors was fogged from constant meetings and quiet panic. You could smell it in the air, burnt nerves, and corporate deodorant. Renee and her audit team had been in there for 4 days straight, and every time someone came out, their face looked a little more haunted. The merger partner's CFO had flown in that morning, wore reading glasses on a chain, and spoke like a woman who had watched grown men cry over decimal points. Her voice carried through the hallway when she said, "You don't get a $250 million integration with shadows on your ledgers." The door closed before I could catch Travis's reply, but judging by the sweat on Derek's neck afterward, it wasn't reassuring. By now, the building had developed its own tension gradient. Near the lobby, optimism and linked in smiles. Near the aquarium, whispers, half-empty coffee cups, and printers spewing out expense records like slot machines in hell. Word trickled down that the audit team had hit a wall. 3 systems, none aligned. The dashboards Derek had built off AutoSync smart data were riddled with blanks and mismatches. Receipts were missing. Totals drifted by 5, 10, sometimes 20 grand depending on which report you trusted. And when Renee's team tried to cross-reference Q2 expenses with actual account activity, they discovered entire weeks of reconciliation gaps marked pending sync. One of the interns said it best, "It's like someone tried to build a skyscraper with spaghetti code and positive vibes." And still, they wouldn't call me, not directly, but I could feel it in the floorboards. A junior auditor stopped me by the vending machine. "Hey, are you?" "Susan," I nodded. She looked around like we were exchanging state secrets. "Were you here when they used something called Expense Vault?" "Yes," I said, before they switched to Smart Track. "Right, do you know if there's any backup data?" I smiled politely. "There's always backup, if you know where to look," she blinked. I left her there with her cold trail mix and existential dread. That afternoon, Travis held another status sync meeting, this time not in the lobby, but locked behind 2 doors with legal in the room. My phone buzzed 10 minutes later. It was Derek. "Hey, wondering if you could swing by later for some quick context on old reimbursements?" "Just a few anomalies, cute." I didn't reply, let him stew. That night, while most of the office emptied out, I stayed late, not to help, just to listen. I sat in my cube with the lights dimmed, finalizing my own monthly reports, because someone still had to do the real work, and overheard Travis pacing in the hallway outside the aquarium. "She's not on the project anymore," he hissed. A pause. Then a woman's voice, calm, deliberate. "Be that as it may, she's the only person who's been here longer than the dysfunction." Another voice joined in, male, nervous. "I think we need to loop her in, just to close some gaps. She might know where the older approvals are." I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and stared at the flickering cursor on my screen. There it was. My name was on the table now, passed around like the last good flashlight in a blackout. Not because they respected me, not because they wanted me back, but because their parachutes were stuck, and they were realizing too late that the only one who knew where the real exits were had been demoted to a filing cabinet. I didn't feel smug. I felt ready. I'd spent weeks watching the cracked spiderweb under their shiny merger show. I knew every number they flubbed, every shortcut they took. I had copies of the pre-policy travel sheets, vendor reconciliation logs from before Travis started slashing approval chains, and even the old email trail from when I warned about the risk of invoice duplication. They'd buried those warnings under buzzwords and champagne. I kept the dirt clean. So when the first urgent calendar invite came through, titled simply Sync W/Susan, I didn't panic. I didn't ask what it was about, I accepted. They were about to call in the cavalry. Too bad I'd already started packing the receipts. They made me wait, not long, just long enough to remind me this was their show, and I was a last-minute understudy being handed a script someone already bled all over. The invite said 10 o'clock a.m., but it was 10:26 when Derek finally opened the aquarium door and said, with the forced brightness of a man halfway through a colonoscopy, "Susan, so glad you could make it." Inside, the war room stank of coffee, stress, and that sterile corporate fear sweat you can't Febreze away. Travis stood near the head of the table, sleeves rolled up like he was one spreadsheet away from solving world hunger. His eyes didn't meet mine, too busy tracking the reactions of the 5 auditors across the table, 3 of whom looked like they'd aged a decade since last week. Legal was in the corner, laptop open, typing furiously. Renee sat in the center, arms crossed, watching me the way a hunter watches brush rustle. Travis cleared his throat. "Susan," he began, putting way too much effort into sounding casual, "we thought it'd be helpful to get your perspective. You know, given your long history with our systems." I nodded once, neutral. He gestured to the chair next to Renee. "Think of this as a chance to redeem some of those, traditional workflows of yours." There it was, framed like an invitation, draped in condescension, like he was tossing a dog a treat and pretending it was a steak. I sat without a word, pulled out my glasses, and opened my notebook, leather-bound, paper, no screen. It made a satisfying thwap when it hit the table. "I'll need raw access," I said calmly. "Full expense logs, not dashboards. No summaries, the source exports line by line." Renee nodded once and slid a flash drive across the table, already extracted, from both SmartTrack and Expense Vault. "You'll notice discrepancies. I'm counting on it," I said, plugging it into the laptop. Derek reluctantly surrendered. They all watched me like I was about to perform surgery on a patient they'd already declared dead. The files opened with a hiss of mismatched data. Headers off by a column, dates misaligned, vendor names riddled with typos. I scrolled slowly, letting the noise fade into background hum. Derek started fidgeting after the first minute. Travis kept checking his phone like a lifeboat might text him. I spotted it within 6 scrolls. The same vendor, Luxent GRP LLC, billed 5 times in 3 weeks. Slightly different names each time. Luxent Group, Luxent GRP, Luxent Group LLC. Luxent GRP and my favorite, Luxent, all just under the $10,000 threshold that required second-level approval, all coded under strategic outreach. No attached receipts, no corresponding calendar invites, no expense notes, no clients. I kept scrolling. Team meal charges at Morton's Steakhouse on a Saturday. 6 people billed. Only 2 actually checked into the office that weekend, according to the keycard logs I still had from last year. Travel expense, San Francisco recon trip, but the flight booked was one way to Cabo. No return, no meeting agenda, no attendees, no follow-up notes. This wasn't sloppy, this was surgical. And Travis, for all his bark, didn't have the spine to ask where the bodies were buried. I looked up finally after 15 straight minutes of silence. "You want this cleaned up or exposed?" I asked, voice dry. Renee blinked. "Define the difference." "Cleaning it up means I give you the patterns, the gaps, the account routing mismatches, and you patch the holes before your partner walks away. Exposing it means I give you a full breakdown, cross-reference with personal benefit logs, and loop in tax compliance. And then I turn to legal. You start prepping for regulatory disclosure." Travis made a noise halfway between a cough and a panic whimper. "That's dramatic," he said. "No," I replied, calmly scrolling again. "What's dramatic is hiding personal trips to Aruba under vendor relations while billing the company for meal reimbursements in 3 states at once." Renee raised an eyebrow. "You found that in 15 minutes?" "No," I said, closing the laptop. "I found it 3 months ago. I just wasn't paid to care." The room went silent, save for the quiet tapping of the lawyer's keyboard, now moving a lot faster. I folded my hands on the table and looked at Travis. "This is your show," I said softly. "But you brought the wrong understudy, and the wrong script, so now you've got 2 options. Let me keep going, or call your PR team and start drafting a very creative explanation for the SEC." No one moved, not even Derek. Controlled confidence, almost boredom, that's what I gave them, because the fun was just beginning. I didn't need hours. I needed silence and access, 2 things they'd denied me for months. Now that I had both, the patterns started glowing like heat signatures on a sniper scope. The trick was always in the timing. Corporate fraud isn't usually about giant red flags, it's about repetition. Predictable, lazy repetition dressed up like efficiency. And Travis, for all his smug strategy talk and forward-thinking bravado, he had the imagination of a beige couch. The first cluster showed up like a bruise under fluorescent light. 4 transactions logged under client lunch Q1 planning spread across 3 days. All from the same restaurant. all billed at $96.42. Different departments listed, product, biz dev, and once even IT, but the cardholder name? Same every time. Someone in Travis's inner circle. Someone whose name also appeared on a now-defunct innovation task force that hadn't met since 2022. $96.42. 4 times. That number wasn't arbitrary. It was $0.58 under our individual meal cap. No manager approval required, no attached notes, no red flags unless you knew where to look. Unless you remembered that this restaurant didn't do individual bills. And they certainly didn't serve anything called Q1 planning lasagna. Check the lunch receipts, I said. The sentence slipped out softly. Too softly, maybe. Renee's pen paused mid-stroke. What? I leaned back and repeated it. Check the lunch receipts. Specifically, the ones between January 12th and February 5th. Look at the dollar amounts. Renee looked over at one of her analysts, who was already clicking through folders like a squirrel on espresso. A few keystrokes later, she muttered, they're all between $95 and $99. Almost none go over $100. That's by design, I said. Our policy auto-flags anything above $100 for director review, but under that, it just logs and clears, especially if the submitter tags it with one of the Greenlight project codes, which, funny enough, most of these do. I stood, walked to the whiteboard, and picked up a marker. I drew a line down the center. On one side, I wrote claimed meal dates. On the other, actual card activity. Then I pulled out my own folder. Printed cross-reference from our old ledger system, one they'd supposedly deprecated but hadn't scrubbed from the card logs. For every lunch claimed, I said, there's a real charge. But not all of them match. Some were rounded, some were split, some don't even belong to us. Renee's analyst chimed in. This one's from a card belonging to a vendor who's not in the employee database. Exactly, I said. Used third-party vendors with company cards to push through meal claims. Same restaurants, same days, sometimes the same damn table, just under different names. I could feel the temperature in the room shift. Derek looked like he might vomit. Travis's foot started tapping, small at first, then frantic, like his brain was running from something his mouth hadn't caught up to yet. Renee leaned forward, voice suddenly razor-sharp. These charges aren't just inflated. They're coordinated. They're layered, I said. Designed to stay invisible unless you align the timestamps, vendor logs, and expense policy thresholds, which no one would do unless they were, say, trying to actually audit something, or they'd been watching it build for a year. I looked directly at Travis. He didn't blink. These aren't team lunches, I continued. They're expense laundering. Shell reimbursements, pocket bonuses. I haven't even touched the travel logs yet, but if you like Cabo, you're gonna love what's in Q3. Renee's team was in full motion now, cross-checking receipts, pulling credit logs, dragging data into comparison matrices. Travis spoke finally, but his voice cracked like it was trying to escape him. It's not fraud. These were approved business activities. Sure, I said. If your business was dining alone at steakhouses on Saturdays in different time zones, 3 times a day. I got a laugh from Renee's assistant. She stifled it quickly. I closed the laptop and folded my arms. I'm not here to debate what's ethical, I said. But if you want to know what's verifiable, there's enough here to sink the merger, or at least delay it long enough that Centicore pulls out of the deal completely. And if they ask why, I'll point them to the receipts. Renee didn't smile, but her fingers stopped moving. She was looking at me now, really looking. Do you want from us? She asked. I paused just long enough to let it hang there like the scent of something burning. I want you to finish the math, I said, because I already did. I'm just here to watch them read it. Renee's team was silent now, no more frantic typing, no more hushed back and forth. Just the dull hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of a chair under too much tension. The kind of silence that makes your skin itch. The lead auditor, a soft-spoken man named Elliot with salt and pepper hair, and the perpetual expression of someone who spent too many years reading the fine print of human failure, hadn't said a word for nearly 20 minutes. He was seated at the corner of the table with a stack of printouts, receipts, vendor summaries, and one of those calculator watches only true masochists wear unironically. I saw it when it hit him. A blink. Then two. Then he reached into his coat pocket, not for his laptop, not for notepad, but for a napkin. A real napkin, beige, from the cafeteria. He flattened it out beside the laptop, pulled a pen from behind his ear, and began scribbling. Numbers, dates, deductions, thresholds. Arrows pointing between shell entity aliases and specific meals, travel claims, and consulting payments. No flair, no drama. Just deliberate, unflinching math. The kind you do when you realize you're not auditing a company. You're autopsying it, everyone watched. Except Travis, who was pacing. His tie was gone, his collar unbuttoned. He kept muttering things under his breath like this is overblown, and we already cleared the preliminary checks, and my personal favorite, there's no intent here. As if intent was the line between sloppy bookkeeping and indictable fraud. Elliot finished his scribbles, capped his pen, and stared at the napkin for a full 5 seconds. Then he pushed his chair back, just enough to get distance from what he'd just written, and slid the napkin down the table toward Travis like it was a lit fuse. Travis froze. He didn't reach for it right away. He stared at it like it might bite. Then slowly he stepped forward and read it. His eyes twitched left to right like he was trying to read and simultaneously unsee what was in front of him. Then his hand went up just slightly and trembled at the wrist. A tiny motion, barely perceptible, loud as thunder in that dead quiet room. The number was written in blue ink, circled 3 times with a single word underneath, exposure. Renee spoke softly, almost kindly. This amount, if not properly disclosed as executive compensation or business liability, it becomes taxable and criminally falsified if it's filed as deductible under shell vendors. She looked at Legal, who was no longer typing, just staring at the napkin like it was written in blood. We're not talking about a footnote, she added. This changes the nature of the entire balance sheet. It corrupts the EBITDA, poisons the M and evaluation model, and qualifies as willful concealment if the shell entities are tied to anyone in leadership. Derek coughed. No one looked at him. He was already fading into background noise. Travis opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Just air, dry, breathless air that smelled like someone who'd finally realized the lifeboat he was clinging to had a hole, and he'd made it himself. I didn't say a word, didn't smile, didn't gloat, just watched. That napkin was the funeral program for his merger. All his buzzwords, all his dashboards, all his posturing, undone by catered steak lunches and a pattern of laziness so arrogant it thought math wouldn't notice. He finally whispered, "Can this be fixed?" Elliot didn't answer. Neither did Renee. Instead, she turned to me and asked, "Did you track this over time?" I nodded. 16 months, every flagged charge, every PO box, every itinerary mismatch. She nodded once, "And your documentation in triplicate," I said. For the first time since I'd walked into that room, Travis turned to me, eyes wide, desperate. "Why didn't you say something?" "I did," I replied. "You called it resistance to innovation." The room temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Outside, I could see the merger team, the interns, the coordinators, the strategic advisors, milling in the hallway, blissfully unaware of the iceberg their captain had steered them into. Inside, the silence cracked. Not with shouting, but with realization. The audit wasn't just failing. It had already failed, and all that was left now was fallout. I wasn't aware those shell companies were still active, Travis stammered, one hand gripping the back of a chair like he needed it to keep from falling over. They were supposed to be dissolved last year. That's what Legal said. But Legal wasn't saying much now. They were whispering. Urgently, 2 of them, heads bent together over a shared screen, eyes flicking back and forth between napkin math and real consequences. One typed while the other muttered phrases that made even the air hold its breath. Material misrepresentation. Section 302, liability, retroactive exposure. Someone mentioned whistleblower clauses. Another said SEC mandatory disclosure like it tasted like battery acid in their mouth. Renee stood. "We're halting our portion of the audit," she announced, calm but unyielding. "This goes well beyond reconciliation. We'll be submitting a preliminary findings report to our client's general counsel and recommending independent forensic analysis." Travis opened his mouth again, closed it, swallowed something invisible. "You don't have to do that," he tried. "We can fix this internally, run a cleanup process, reclassify the expenses." Elliot cut him off, still seated, still staring at the napkin like it had personally insulted his ethics. "We don't clean messes," he said. "We document them." Across the room, Derek looked like he wanted to climb inside the ventilation system and never return. I watched him pick up his phone, hesitate, then put it back down. The others from the merger team, 2 junior execs and the firm's freshly minted VP of strategy, sat frozen like children at a dinner table where the grown-ups had started screaming. And me? I started packing my things. No drama, no announcement. Just unplugged the borrowed laptop, closed my leather notebook, and slid it all into my bag, because my work here was done. They didn't need me for the implosion, they had lawyers for that. And crisis PR, and the now inevitable email to Centicor's executive team explaining why due diligence had suddenly hit a technical pause. Behind me, Renee began outlining next steps, voice low but clear. Travis sat down, hard, staring at the floor. The hand that once waved away audits and policy controls now trembled just trying to hold a pen. I caught a glimpse of the napkin again, creased, smudged, but unmistakable in its brutality. The number circled on it represented more than money. It was exposure, consequence, proof that arrogance has a price and paper trails are patient. "Wait," Travis croaked as I reached the door. I turned just a little. He looked at me like a man finally realizing the fire was real and the extinguisher he mocked was already halfway out the building. "You're just going to leave?" "I was never invited," I said, and I meant it. They hadn't wanted my eyes on their numbers, my voice in their meetings, my experience on their team. They wanted a story, sleek, clean, futuristic. They got receipts instead. I stepped into the hallway. The light was brighter out here, clearer. Interns avoided eye contact. Phones buzzed in pockets no one dared answer. From the aquarium, I could still hear the murmurs: restatement risk, criminal exposure, disclosure deadline. My heels clicked softly on the tile as I walked back to my desk. I moved slowly, not because I was savoring it, though maybe I was, but because there was no rush. Let them burn. I'd already packed my parachute. I was halfway to the parking garage when I heard my name echo off the concrete, fast footsteps behind me, heels too expensive to be HR and too frantic to be PR. It was Marcy, company counsel, usually composed, always unreadable. But now, hairline cracked, breath shallow, legal pad pressed to her chest like a defibrillator. Susan, she said, catching up, the kind of false smile you wear when you're bleeding in a courtroom but still trying to shake hands. Wait just 1 second, I stopped, let her sweat. She shifted awkwardly, papers in hand. I know things escalated, that's one word, I replied. She inhaled like she was about to ask me to forgive a war crime. Listen, we legal, that is. We reviewed the merger prep documents and realized your prior role was technically listed in the transitional continuity clause. I said nothing, just tilted my head. Let her keep digging. Which means, she continued, you're contractually pre-cleared as a consultant in the event of data instability during due diligence review. And you're experiencing data instability, I said like I was describing the weather. Marcy nodded, slowly, carefully. Audit team has flagged your reports as the only verifiable accounting framework predating the inconsistencies. If we want any chance of salvaging this merger, hell of even buying time, we'll need you to walk the Centicore compliance team through your version of the books. I let that hang there. She added quickly, of course, compensation will be adjusted. How adjusted? A 12-month engagement, triple your previous salary, full autonomy, no reporting line to Travis, and a retroactive NDA buyout for your original termination clause. There it was, the whole world flipping over in a single breath. I nodded slowly. I'll need it in writing, I said. It's already drafted, she said, holding out a manila envelope like it might burn her fingers. Signable by EOD. I took it. No smile, no handshake, just quiet, practiced control. Back inside, the aquarium was now a pressure cooker. Renee's team was packing up, boxes full of flagged documents and exported logs. Travis stood by the whiteboard, no longer talking, just staring, the napkin still gripped in one white-knuckled hand, the blue ink circle now faintly smudged by his sweat. He didn't see me walk back in. Didn't notice as I passed the interns, who were now whispering things like resignation package and SEC contact escalation. I took a seat in an empty conference room 2 doors down. Opened the envelope. Read the terms, every line, every clause, every comma. Standard consulting protections, indemnity, payout guarantees, direct liaison to Centicore CFO. Autonomy, respect. The kind of deal I'd spent my whole career being told I wasn't bold enough to ask for. I signed, with my own pen. And as I stood to leave, contract in hand, bag over my shoulder, I paused just long enough to glance through the aquarium glass. Travis hadn't moved, still holding the napkin, still staring at the number like if he looked long enough, it might shrink. But it wouldn't. It would sit there, ink and paper and truth, long after the press releases were pulled and the interns found new jobs. And me, I walked out. Not with revenge, not with rage, but with receipts and a contract that made sure they'd pay for every single one. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.